this is news.ph, the first 100 days. Secretary Luna, can you tell us first, is there anyone who can, who does advise the president, gives him words of wisdom about how to handle all of this, now that this is not Davao, but the world stage?
Pia, you must understand I'm an outsider. I'm not in government.
Yes.
But from what I understand, there are a number of people that he listens to, and many of them are in the cabinet. For example, the executive secretary, Yoltia, his right-hand man, Bongo, the cabinet secretary, Juna Basco, of course, Secretary of Finance, Sonny Dominguez, and then the former North Cotabato governor, Manny Piñon, and I'm sure he listens to Ben Diocno, Eileen Briones, Ernie Bernia.
But have any of them told him that?
Frankly, I'm not sure. Of course, I forgot two very important people who we personally interact with before we leave on a trip. When I say we, I'm referring to FBR. Secretary Esperanti, NSA, and Secretary Yasek, current Secforan. So there are enough people there that can process with him. It's a question of whether they have time to process. Considering that President Duterte has been on the job for 90 days, he's still going through his learning curve. Normally, a new person on the job is given 6 months. Normally, is given 6 months to learn the ropes and settle down. So I guess because he started out like a house on fire, addressing so many fundamental issues.
There were many things happening from day one.
From day one, that's correct. There's a lot of fixing to do, but putting things in the right place. He probably hasn't had enough time to just relax, settle down, pull back, and then process.
But he needs to do that because
He has to
the
do
trips to China and Japan push through later on in October.
That's correct.
Secretary Golez.
Well, I was so happy when I learned that he was visiting Vietnam, because Vietnam is probably one of the best examples of how to handle China. You know, Vietnam has a long history, centuries of conflict with China, that a lot of people have died. And at the same time, Vietnam had 10 years of war with the US, and maybe about 1 million Vietnamese died in that conflict. But in spite of that, Vietnam is able to maintain open diplomatic relationships with China. They continue the dialogue, which is what we should be doing in spite of the South China Sea, West Philippine Sea conflict. They've had riots in Vietnam because of this oil rig, but in spite of that, they kept opening the diplomatic channels. Now, but also, very positively, they're now opening up to the US. In fact, a lot of people are saying, geopolitical analysts are saying that Vietnam is drifting towards the US. In fact, they're talking of a possible use of Cam Ranh Bay, the naval base in Vietnam. And you'll be surprised. Pew Research conducted a study of the whole world on what is the perception of the United States. Of course, the Philippines is among the top, 92% favorable rating as far as Filipinos are concerned. About 70% for India, 70% for Japan, 84% for Korea. But you'll be surprised, Vietnam, 77%, in spite of the 10 years of war. And this is a very good example, because, you know, my concern is that when we open up channels like, for example, in China, it shouldn't be at the expense of a good relationship with other countries, like, for example, the US. In the case of the US, look at the economic aspects. BPO, you need a very good marketing strategy to sustain the momentum of our business process outsourcing, which right now is about $25 billion and employing about 1 million. 77% of that is US based. And we are expecting that in 20 years' time, the BPO industry will go up to about 50 billion. That will account for about 20% of our GDP. If we alienate or even antagonize prospective American investors because of some negative comments on the US that might slow down a big economic driver, the BPO. Not to mention also, when it comes to remittances, 31% of remittances come from the United States. So these are very major economic factors, and I cannot see how China can make up for possible losses in that area.
Secretary Luna, I know you said you're not in the sector, but you might have an idea. Like, what is at the root, President Duterte's anger with the United States? Like, was there an incident in Davao City involving the U.S.?
Yes, I think there was sometime in 1993, but before I answer that question, I just want to add to what I said earlier when you asked who does he consult. Well, I think if I were a coach, I'd tell him time out. It's time for you to sit down and regroup and talk to your cabinet and LEDAC. I think LEDAC leader, they're putting LEDAC together again. It's important to do that. And the National Security Council. He has to meet with them quite often and process all of these issues that pertain to the military, diplomatic, economic environment.
Get all the presents that were.
And he can get all the presents there as well for good optics. Now, in the case of what could have led to this, well, I think there are many factors that get into or cause this
Well, I
behavior.
asked that because I heard there was some sort of urban legend about a certain incident in Davao.
There was an American in 1993 that was supposedly funding terrorist organizations. At the time, SOYAF, MILF, and there were spate of bombings in Mindanao. Now, this fellow blew himself up while putting together a bomb in the Davao Hotel. And then before the criminal justice system could grab a hold of him, he was spirited away.
By?
Supposedly by American authorities. And Digong was then the mayor. Felt very insulted, very slighted by that. Because a number of his constituents were killed or maimed in those series of bombings.
And as far as he's concerned, you don't do that to be in my city.
Correct, and he's big hari-hari and all that, right? So I think that influenced him. The other has to do with the fact that he wants to have peace. His strategic intent is to clean up government and at the same time make peace with all of the Filipino rebels that government has been at loggerheads with for decades now. Because in his view, we can't deal with external threats if we are a divided nation. So we have to unite and we gotta strike a peace deal. And the Moros have this very deep resentment toward the Americans, which date back to what happened in Sulu and other atrocities, real and perceived, against the Americans up to the present day.
And that's why he brought out that photo.
In Budao. So I think what he's trying to say is, if this is what's one of the things that's stopping a real peace deal with the Moros, U.S. stand by muna. No? Except that he probably didn't say it that way. He said he doesn't want anybody, no Americans on Philippine soil or something like that.
In Mindanao.
Eventually he clarified that na wag muna sa Mindanao. You can be anywhere else in the country, but wag muna sa Mindanao because it's rankling the sensibilities of the Moros. So he wants to achieve a certain goal. He sees certain obstacles. He's trying to remove those obstacles, and we just have to help him along, do it the right way.
And by what? Articulating?
It has to be, when he expresses himself, this has to be processed with his team. How do I say this without hurting the other side? Because after all, we're allies. They're big boys. They understand what, and they should understand where we're coming from.
Yeah. All right. There's supposed to be a trip to China, although nothing has really been confirmed with a trip to Japan. And he talks about, I want to visit Russia also. When you hear the president talking like this, what is this all mean?
So, ang sa akin yan, maganda nag-open up, no? As I said, I'm in favor of that. But it should be an add-on, not a zero-sum game where the gain of one is the loss of another. Pero balik naman po sa lahat tayo may mga sama na loob sa past. But sometimes you have to let go. I'm not trying to psychoanalyze people. Yung the art of moving on. For example, Philippine-American War, Aguinaldo. Siyempre, kalaban talaga ng America. But you know what he did? He sent his son to West Point. He became a West Point cadet. Miguel Malvar fought a very long war against the American. After the end of the war, all his sons, all his children graduated in U.S. Universities. And probably one of the best examples is President Quirino. President Quirino's wife was killed in that massacre in Manila by the Japanese, plus some other family members. But when he became president, he took care of the Japanese. And the Japanese almost virtually wanted to construct a statue for him for this act of forgiving. You know, and that improved the relationship between the Philippines and Japan, especially during the reconstruction years after the war. So these are the things that we need. We have to open up. As I said, let's open up with all countries. No country should be an enemy, but not at the expense of a long, well-established relationships where we've been gaining a lot economically, strategically. Not to mention that, you know, China still has that, is still a threat as far as the territory is concerned. And we cannot, you know, if they're nice to us, I look at it as part of courtship, but the bottom line here is they're still lusting for our territory. And that to me is very negative.
What if China says, oh, you know, we're going to build you your railways, we're going to give you this, we're going to give you that, but can you leave us alone? South China Sea.
But not at the expense of our territory.
No.
But by the way, that's a violation of our constitution. It is constitutionally mandated that we must protect our exclusive economic
So we
zone,
can't even talk about
especially in the
exploration,
marine
for
belt,
example.
without amending the constitution.
They'll have to amend the Constitution first. Anyway, well, President Duterte had even more colorful words to say upon returning from Vietnam early Friday morning, this time about what he says are 3 million drug addicts all over the country and migrants that he says Europe and the U.S. are turning away. Here he is again in his own words.
Ngayon,
107.
you can call me,
107.
107.
but I was never into, I am never into hypocrisy like you. Close your doors at winter time, there are migrants.
I get him, I get what he's trying to do. Just
You allow them to run, and then you're worried about this, about 1,000, 2,000, 3,000. Hitler massacred 3 million. No, there is 3 million, 3 million drug
Their last names too.
I'd be happy to slaughter them. At least, if Germany had Hitler, the Philippines would have, you know, no victims.
Tama
There
po.
would be all criminals. Finish the problem of my country and save the next generation.
Okay.
This
Okay.
So the president, in a way, saying, for you to tell me what to do about the killings if you aren't merciful towards them. Is that fair? I mean,
I know. I think we all know what he's trying to drive at, and we get it. I think where we find discomfort is in the way it's being said, how it's being said. There's a better way of doing it, and this is why I always have to go back to what I said earlier, that he has to process with his team what needs to be said. And there are also certain protocols to follow. If there are controversial statements that need to be said, perhaps maybe he can give it to somebody to say it for him, to give him a way out as well, right? But here he's boxed himself in. We know that he wants to rid government and society of crime and corruption because it's out of control. That's why he declared the state of